right, everyone, chill.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look.
So a couple of days ago, I finally unlocked the last of the Ultimate Descendants currently available in the First Descendant, and all without the need of my wallet. Which is great news, I can eat this month. But I joke, but unlocking Ultimate Viessa and watching the damage numbers pop up, that sure isn't a joke. I really underestimated her damage and her abilities, and I've been having so much fun really squeezing out the most from her kit. Enemies fall left, right and centre from her cold blast, and being almost a true skills-based descendant and not relying on guns and encounters just makes her so much more fun to use. In this video we'll be looking at my current go-to build for Viessa, as yes, this does translate to regular Viessa too, just in case that you don't have her ultimate done just yet. We'll discuss what modules you need to slot in, what makes her so strong, the general setup and playstyle, and even more. If you do learn something useful with this video and want to see more breakdowns and guides for more Descendants, make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back for more uploads. But with that out of the way though, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing that we should probably do is head over to our module sections. Now you can take a screenshot of this in case you want to just copy and paste it and just leave the video here, but I'm going to try and explain as to what kind of decisions went into this as well as the rest of her kit, so you can understand how, if you want to take this away and you want to build it in your own game, how you should really be focusing on how you should be playing her and everything like that. So the first of her skills, we'll go from left to right and it just makes the most sense. We're going to be looking at Frost Shards. Frost Shards is going to be her really basic ability that's going to be dealing AoE damage. It's going to be activating all of your passive. It's going to be ridiculously low cooldown because we are going for cold-bloodedness. And what this will do is it will reduce the skill cooldown even further. So we can get this down to less than a 1 second cooldown, which is absolutely fantastic. Now this, because Viessa has really high skill multipliers when it comes to amounts of damage, so as you can see here is 803%, absolutely huge. It means that we don't have to go into modifiers to be able to increase the damage even more, because it will end up being a little bit of a waste, unfortunately. So obviously, you know, if we put another 80% on top of that, it's going to be a 10% increase in damage, whereas there's other things that we can do to be able to increase the damage even further. So it doesn't really make too much sense to go into her modifiers, especially seeing as this is the lowest one that exists on the list. So we do have 803% damage, absolutely fantastic. It also does that in a burst, which is then gives us an explosion damage range. We've boosted this up to 6.7 meters, which is absolutely fantastic. You can boost it further, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it too much because I do feel like you are sacrificing on damage if you go start straying any higher than that, unless you get a reactor that has the range roll on top of it. You can boost this up to, I believe it was close to around about 8.5-9 meters if I remember right. So you don't, like I said, you can if you want to, but I feel like 6.7 is a nice middle ground. And you can also increase its projectile speed increase as well, which is a way that you can mess about with, but I will discuss that once we get a little bit further into the modules. Now the next one that we're going to be looking at is going to be cold-bloodedness. This is going to be essentially activating an additional passive for the rest of our skills, which is absolutely fantastic. It does so much for the build. It really just essentially takes what she already can do and just makes it so much better. So what this does is it replaces our frost roads. It means that we're not going to be leaving any kind of damage trails or anything on the floor. It's not going to increase our speed, but what it will do is it will increase our skill power by 5%, which is fantastic. So all of our skills are going to be doing 5% more damage. It's going to reduce the MP cost of all of those skills by 20% as well, meaning that we can cast things a bit more often and we don't have to worry about how much it's draining our MP. And on top of that, we also have a cooldown reduction rate of 20%, which then gets stacked on even further from our 68.2%, taking us up to a massive 88.2% skill cooldown, which is absolutely fantastic. And that is what's going to make Frost Shards down to less than a second cooldown. So you definitely want to be able to slot this one in. It just really kind of takes everything that the build does and just makes it so much more damaging, and then allows you to be able to cast it so much faster as well. Speaking of other abilities that we can cast out, we do have Cold Snap. This is absolutely an amazing ability because it reaches out so much further than you expect it to, but it also encompasses a wide range of enemies. If you've got like a corridor of them all running towards you, this is your best bet because this will travel through enemies. It will also travel through geometry. It's kind of insane as to how good that is. The only thing that it won't do is it won't move too far up or down on geometry. So if you are on a ledge and you've got enemies below you, this will not affect them underneath it if it gets under a certain kind of like a certain range. So your best bet is to then just swap over to frost shards if you are aiming down or aiming up, things like that. But you'll understand that once you actually give the build a bit of a go. But this does hit for 1,149% of our skill power, which is huge, and once again it can be an expandable range. We can expand this even further for both kind of like horizontal as well as how far it kind of like reaches out to as well. So you can kind of like make this reach out and touch enemies, which is kind of fantastic. But once again, I feel like this is kind of like the best place. And you can see that the cooldown is kind of on the short side. We can get that further down, obviously, with cold-bloodedness. But it's never going to be as low as what Frost Shards is. So, you know, it's just something you need to factor in. The last of our castable abilities is going to be our ultimate. This is going to be Blizzard. This is going to be mostly used as your elite kind of like damage. This is going to be for your stubborn target. How this one works is that you activate it, it allows you to be able to place it down, you choose where it goes, you activate your trigger, and then basically the ability starts going off. This lasts for 6 seconds. This will do damage every 2 seconds while in that, and then straight after it's done, it will then explode, dealing even more damage in a bigger radius. So yeah, it makes sense to expand the radius for this ability to be able to encapsulate as many enemies as possible, but keep in mind that your passive is going to be activating your ice shackles, which makes enemies move slower inside of it anyway. So you know, it doesn't have to be huge, but it does make it a little bit easier for you to be able to activate it, so there's just things like that. Now, you can increase the duration of this ability, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. The reason why is that if you don't increase it by 2-second intervals, you're not going to get any kind of benefit, and on top of that, you also want to maximize the amount of damage this is going to be doing, which it will only do once it detonates and the ability finishes. So in some kind of argument, you kind of want this as low as possible, so you don't want to increase the duration, so you kind of want to leave this as 6 seconds. And then lastly, that leaves us with our passive, and this is essentially going to be in 2 parts really. We've got an offensive part and we've got a utility part. The offensive part is when we're activating our abilities and we put Ice Shackle on enemies, we create an ice sphere that will just kind of like randomly fly off and do itself. It will do its own thing. It will do a little bit of extra damage. It auto tracks. It targets whoever it wants to. You know, got things like that. You can increase its radius, which we're going to be affecting. So it goes up to 3 meters. But it also applies some Ice Shackle on top of it. So it's just an extra, you know, bit of damage that you don't necessarily, that you can kind of take with you, and it will just go and deal with trash mobs. But the Ice Shackle is fantastic, and this is the reason why we're not going into too much when it comes to sustain, some HP, some defense, and everything like that. We've just got enough to get by, and then with Ice Shackle, we don't have to worry about it anymore because enemies won't be able to move, and they won't be able to be able to fight back or anything like that. So we only need a little bit to help us out in like public fights or against Colossus or against main bosses that cannot be Ice Shackled too much, and then everything else we will just Ice Shackle all the way down and they will not be able to fight us back. So it's just basically how the build kind of works, but you can see all the stats that is pretty much there. So we've already covered a build, so let's have in terms of like a kit, let's start talking about what modules make up a build. So of course we have talked about cold-bloodedness, you know, that's pretty much just like a slot in here. Just one thing to note is if you do not have max ranks into this, you can take away ranks from things like Spear and Shield, because we're only after that second line, which is the skill power, and you get that just as standard, just from the base ability. So as you can see here, you know, even at base rank, we already got the maximum of that skill power, 8.1%, and that's essentially what we're after when it comes to this mod. So you can actually take a couple of points out of there, and that will save you on your cold-bloodedness. So that's just one thing that you can kind of like factor in for your build, just in case you don't want to spend all that gold and all that Kuiper. So we have gone into as much cooldown as we physically can squeeze out of her, because she doesn't have access to the dimension side of things when it comes to multi-talented. So we do have Nimble Fingers at max, we do have MP Conversion at max. On top of that, we do have Focus on Chill, which is going to give us a little bit more skill cooldown and also increase our chill skill power. This is the best way to increase the amount of damage that our abilities are going to be doing because of how high our modifiers are. So we're not going to increase modifiers to do damage, we're going to increase the amount of base skill power, and that is going to be the best way to increase the amount of damage we're going to be dealing. So Focus on Chill is the best way to be able to go. You can go for the just the blue mod if you want to go for Chill Specialist to squeeze out a little bit more damage, but I think that the skill cooldown is worth it in this case, so therefore I've just slotted that one in instead. Now we have gone for an increased HP just to give us a little bit of staying up power, just to give us a little bit of sustain, but we don't need too much here. Technically there is an argument to be made that if you actually master this build, you do not need increased HP if you're going into mobbing, because you will essentially be keeping everything on lockdown, so you can take that out and swap it in for other things. If you were to go and do something like that, I probably would recommend being able to put something like Glacial Synxium in there instead, because that will give you another 10% increase to your chill skill power, so that's another way that you can kind of go with that kind of build. We have gone for skill expansion. That is going to increase our range on all of our abilities. Absolutely fantastic. We definitely want to be able to do that, but we only need the one mod in here, and that definitely has the one without downsides. Before we talk about the crit side of things though, we do have a Spear and Shield. We have talked about that. The defense is quite nice, so if you do have extra points, feel free to be able to put it in there. But the skill power is essentially the reason why we're going for this. So it kind of works as like a double positive just from one mod alone. So that skill power is fantastic and goes into all of our modifiers once again. Now we do have the crit package here, which is going to be skill insight, skill concentration, emergency measures and frontlines. This does give us a total of 207.7% into our hit rate as well as our hit damage. The reason why is because Viessa actually has a decent crit rate, just as standard, which is at 15%. So actually once we actually put all this into a build, we can then go into here and you can see we've got a 46.155% crit hit rate, which is kind of reliable considering how many enemies that she can hit all at once. So I do think it's worth going into the crit package just for her. Now if it was less than, it was like 10% or 5%, I definitely would be dropping this for other options, but 15% I think actually gives us a decent shot at being able to do some decent damage here. So we have gone for the crit modules, and that's the reason why we're able to increase the amount of damage we are to, you know, be able to get into like the seven figures kind of reliably and in an AoE as well. So we've discussed the modules. We've only got a couple of things that were like a couple of categories that can really affect how much damage we're going to be doing anyway. So let's talk about the components. Components is a little bit easier. So we do have the Slayer set. We have gone for the 4-piece. This gives us an increase to our skill cost, but it mostly gives us a skill power increase, and that 26.1% is huge. It's going to give us a 26.1% increase to the amount of DPS we'd be throwing out if we didn't have the set on. But so that skill cost is a bit of a pain, but just keep in mind that cold-bloodedness does actually offset that because it reduces it by 20%, so it still gives us a negative 5% as like a net effect, which is absolutely fantastic. So it just kind of like keeps those abilities in check. But if you are looking for the Slayer set, I would highly recommend that you get things on your sensor, which is max MP and MP recovery in combat. You definitely want the MP roll when it comes to your memory slot as well, so I probably would be looking out for that instead of electric resistance. And then when it comes to the auxiliary power, you also want the MP recovery outside of combat, which is really nice, and that helps you. So once you travel from combat scenario to combat scenario, you should be relatively back up to full, and then that pretty much gives you the best kind of supply that you possibly could do for those fights. Now when it comes to reactors though, it's a little bit more tricky because we do have what I have right here, which is our chill and tech, but the reason why it's a little bit tricky is because of 1 ability and a 3 ability are both fusion, which means that you can, depending on which abilities you want to rely on, you can go for a chill fusion, or in this case you can go for the ultimate, which is a chill tech. So it depends on which roles you want to be able to go for. You can mix and match if you want to. I do have this one that has a tech and a chill power boost ratio, which is quite nice. I mean, it's not necessarily best in slot, but it does give it that consistency factor. But I would recommend, if you are looking for something that's going to increase the amount of damage in general, I think maybe either this or a crit hit rate and crit hit damage is going to be your best shout. I think either of those is going to be best in slot, so I would recommend that you keep an eye out for either of those. It gives you a few more options, but obviously you can choose whether you want that on chill tech or if you want that on chill fusion. Lastly, in terms of the weaponry though, there's not much that is going to be happening here, because she is primarily a skill-based character. You're not necessarily going to be shooting your gun very often, so you can go for something like a mobbing gun, like Enduring Legacy, which is absolutely fantastic. We've got Greg's. You know, there's a few weapons that are definitely out there that you can definitely get away with being able to use. I have gone for Wave of Light, 1 because I'm leveling up, 2 because it matches this mounting, but there is one mod that I would recommend that you do have on here if you're not using your guns for damage, and that's actually to go for Defense Master. The reason why is because once you defeat an enemy, and it doesn't have to be with the gun, This will also give you a massive 128.3% increase to your defense for 10 seconds, and once you have this maxed out, this should get it down to 15-second cooldown, meaning that you only have a 5-second window where you do not have this defense boost. Now, as you can see, we do have relatively slow stats in sustain, so therefore this could actually give you a really good way of being able to increase your defense without going into your descendant modules and taking out something else to be able to make that kind of change. So that's just one recommendation I'd put in there, but you know, you don't necessarily need it, and you definitely can get away with just using your mobbing weapon, so you can use this kind of setup. But you know, if you are primarily just looking to use the skills, that's the way that I would probably recommend you do that. So how the kind of setup goes is that if we go into the laboratory and we just activate some enemies, so essentially what you'd be doing is you'd be coming around a corner. You'd want to activate cold-bloodedness first and foremost, because that is going to give you all the benefits for the rest of your skills, and then you just start activating, going ham with all of your abilities. Once they come off cooldown, just start spamming them, just chuck them out. You should get loads of abilities to be able to throw out here. Like I said, you can see all the damage numbers that are pretty much popping up on screen right now. And then, yeah, we're pretty much good to go. Those enemies, because they're invincible, that's the only reason why I survived. But essentially, yeah, we're all good. And then, yeah, you just kind of either wait for your MP to come back because you've got the rolls on your kit, or you'll be able to find some MP balls that have dropped from all the enemies that you've killed. Alternatively, you could go into inversion reinforcement, and if you do pick up selective neurostimulation, this also helps you out with your MP side of things every 60 seconds, and this has a chance of either giving you 13, 23, or 30% of your max MP back every single minute, and that will definitely help you out with the skill cost kind of side of things. But with all that, it pretty much brings the video to an end. I must admit, I can't believe I've left Viessa to unlock last. I've genuinely been having a blast with it and been so happy to max her out catalyst-wise. Sure, Hayley may be the new Ice Queen when it comes to Colossus fights, but Viessa takes the crown on all of the content pieces with her quick cooldowns and damaging AoEs. She's easily been my favourite ultimate to level so far, at least until Ultimate Freyna pokes her head around next month. So this is the section I want to hear from you. How are you finding Season 1 in the First Ascendant? What are your thoughts on Viessa? And do you have her ultimate variant unlocked? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. And as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. I'll see you all on the next video.